We're continuing our conversation about how to interact with folks in the world to be able to push back on some of the concepts that are becoming more the norm. And we've gone through the same-sex agenda. We've gone through the abortion discussion. We've talked about transsexuality and that ideal. We've talked about illegal immigration. We ended last week talking about climate change. This week, let's talk a little bit about the word that Sarah has helped us to understand. Is not necessarily a profane word. Indoctrination. And indoctrination of our kids. Now, I'll say our kids, but ultimately, this conversation can also expand to address adults, because in the world we live in right now, there's indoctrination of adults going on too. And surprisingly, a lot of adults don't know how to push back on that. So let's talk about indoctrination, specifically child indoctrination. And if it has tendrils that take us further, we can do that too. So what are your thoughts there? What is this big bad book of 66 chapters? What's it tell us about child indoctrination?
To do it.
Well, yeah. First Corinthians 2:12-13. You know, in paraphrasing, you pass on the truth. Parents show love and respect for their children. So it kind of goes with 2 Timothy 3:16 and 17. Learning about God is beneficial. So, yeah, I mean, we're supposed to train up a child in the way they should go, right?
Yep.
And as they get older, they will not depart from it. At least that's the goal.
Okay.
That's the goal. So
if we do it, other folks have difficulty doing it.
Okay, so let's talk about that a little bit, because I'm sure we've heard that passage a gazillion times in our scripture-oriented or scripture-learning lives. So that train up a child in the way that he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart. So let me discuss a little bit the fallacy of our belief in that, and then let's bandy about perhaps what its application is for real. So part of the reason me and Jesus had a really tough time for a few years is because Ellen and I were actively doing or working at our what we were hoping was Jesus assisted best to do exactly what we just talked about, to train up our children in the way that they should go, and when they're old, they should not depart. Yet they departed. So what's wrong with this picture? Is the scripture a lie? Did I misinterpret what it means in its application? Or do we need to understand this perhaps differently than I think in some ways Ellen and I did, or certainly I did, when I was in the process of raising my children to become adults?
okay. You know, you're stirring the pot and you're like a state away, and I don't like that. But anyway. Okay. So yes, you did what you're supposed to do, right? You worked with your children to show them the path that is the right way. Okay? But you got to remember, kids can make their own choices too. And okay, you're gonna smack me, aren't you?
Nope.
I mean, you've done what you can do. You can't force them, but you can only do the best job that you know how. And then as they get older, hopefully they make the choices that are the right choices to make.
Okay. So I like some of your speech, but you have a couple of tricky words in that I wasn't paying attention to at all when I was thinking about this scripture. And let me tell you one of them, because one of the phrases that always has freaked me out is the best I can. In fact, a lot of us do the best we can. So, and I'll be in the boat. I believe that we did the best we can, except actually looking back in hindsight, we recognize there are other things that perhaps could have been done. Okay. And then the other thing, the other word that you used, the other adverb was hopefully. Now, when I read this passage and consider its application, I don't see hopefully there at all. So what's going on?
The kids have an onus of responsibility as well. I'm just saying, yeah, I could shove it all down their throats, right? But if they don't do anything with it, that's on them.
Couple of comments. Number one, the last chapter has not been written yet. So I think that there is hope. That again, the older we get, the smarter our parents get. It's amazing how that happens. Number two, I take great hope in Daniel Jenkins because his upbringing brought him to the place where he realized he was in the wrong place, getting indoctrinated in the wrong way, counter to what he understood, and he did something about it. That's huge to me. Number three, and this is not intended to be any sort of smackdown on the Reddings, but sometimes we send the kids off to go get trained rather than actively being a part of the training themselves. And this is one of the issues with Vacation Bible School. I'm going to say it's one of the issues with Awana, because Awana becomes a work thing, whether or not we realize it. We send them off and they're supposed to do the training and we're not reinforcing it at home. And so I think that there are a lot of variables there. Lastly, I recall an incident that was told to me by a participant, Robert Hughes, Dr. Robert Hughes, who at one time was the head of the Liberty Seminary. He walked into Dr. Falwell Sr.'s office and tendered his resignation. And Jerry asked him, well, what's going on? Why would you got to do this? And his comment back was, well, as a pastor, I am failing because my children have gone off, not necessarily Charles, but one of the other ones, have gone off the deep end. They're not living for the Lord. And Jerry basically took him, much better educated man, much better trained man. He could walk circles around Falwell in Hebrew and Greek, whatever. He had to actually sit him down and basically say, once they get to a point, as far as child rearing is concerned, they are really out from under your control. So it's not really your responsibility at this stage of the game. They have to take responsibility for themselves. And I don't know for a fact, but maybe he even shared with them that he and Bobby was Barbara Hughes, were no longer under the tutelage of their parents. And by then he was an elderly man. So the point is, we do have our own decisions. And lastly, I guess, one of the things that we misunderstand with the Proverbs passage, train up a child in the way they should go. We sometimes try to force them into their own, into our ideal for them. I wasn't able to play sports, so I want, my kid to be a quarterback or whatever. We try to superimpose our goals on them, but that's not necessarily the way they should go. So, circling back to the beginning, the last chapter's not been written.
So I have something here that says that there are some scholars who interpret this differently, and they actually believe that the word "should" is not in the actual Hebrew, and they say that the passage should read something more like "train up a child in his own way, and when he is old, he will not depart from it," which is essentially saying is if you provide no instruction for your children as they're growing old, they're going to act like they have no instruction as they get old. So it's not necessarily a guarantee of whatever training you pour into them, they're actually going to end up that way. It's just a matter of saying, if you provide them no instruction, they're definitely going to end up that way.
Hand it nothing and you hit it every time.
Right, because I had a note that I put a little asterisk by because we've talked about this, and perhaps the training up, right, should be in critical thinking.
Mhm.
Because then if you train them in that aspect and they are thinking about it, they're asking the questions, then that is really the path that will lead them down to where they ultimately should be. Because that's what I said. Critical thinking has a role in becoming a Christ follower. I think we've talked about this, oh golly, several times, that really Christianity is a thinking man's religion, right? And so if that's turn off.
No.
Okay. So if you've trained them to be critical thinkers, that is going to give them that sturdy base for them to understand why they believe what they believe. Not because my parents have told me I should believe this, but because I have asked the questions and understood it better.
Yeah, regurgitation education has no place in my mind.
But that doesn't stop us from doing it. And Bruce is looking to weigh in, so let me just make this statement, and then certainly you can share there, Pastor Bruce. You know, folks, you've met, if not encountered or know, several people that have used to come to our building, right? And one of the first things that they would ask is, well, what services do you have for our kids? And then that might be followed up, depending on their backgrounds. Do you have Awanas? Do you have VBS? And one of the things that Ellen and I learned is very, very much based on, I think, kind of where Sarah is these days. And Sarah used to manage that stuff. So I'm always very proud and pleased that she evolved with a different mindset. And Jean just said this, and some of these would get both of these guys kicked out of the Baptist and maybe some of the evangelistic churches, which is this. Just expecting that those kids are going to absorb because they're participants and they have worksheets doesn't mean that they're becoming believers in Jesus. And so, and I guess in some ways I'm saying VBS or Awanas by itself, and this is also, we kind of send the kids off to a place to indoctrinate them, yet our houses don't reflect that. And we don't give our kids opportunities to critically think and then to espouse what it is that they're being exposed to. We just expect that because we're sending them to fire engine school, that they're going to come back fire engines. I hear Brother Gene saying, you know, I have a lot of wonderful hope anchored in watching the expedition of Brother Daniel Jenkins. Yeah, because Brother Daniel Jenkins had a kind of critical thinking and then also an indoctrination that when he was hanging out with the pigs, he didn't have to come to himself. He just went, how did I get hanging out with the pigs? And made a conscious decision to say, I need to get out of hanging out with the pigs. Now, because we're not mentioning any institution or any place, this can stream and you don't have to write me angry letters. But what I am also saying is this: it's nice to be able to have some hope anchored in Brother Daniel and Brother Nathan. But folks, in terms of looking at our percentage, we wouldn't even be asked to come up to the big leagues because we've got 2 out of several kids who decided otherwise. But I appreciate the discussion here because the discussion here is one, and I like where Steve has taken us, is it's real easy sometimes to just look at the English and just listen to the sermons and think, train them up in the way that they should go when they're older, they'll not depart. And sometimes we don't think and understand that Proverbs is about ideals. It's about ideals as opposed to that's exactly the way it works all the time. But Brother Steve is probably right on when he's talking about you got to bring them up, and this is going to kind of go the nurture and the admonition of the Lord, but critically thinking so that along the way you're taking their temperature and asking them why along the way. So there's some other scriptures to bring into this before I have Pastor Bruce weigh in. But certainly, look, if you're going to do Proverbs 22:6, you got to be doing Deuteronomy 6:6-7, right? So and as you go along, you've got to be taking temperature to say, what does this mean to you? Why does this mean to you? Because our kids are going to do a lot of stuff just because that's what they do to go along and get along. They learn the yardstick of our household. But that's also when, as soon as they get out of our household, they're lickety-split going bye-bye. So let me pause there. Pastor Bruce or other folks?
I really appreciate where you guys went with that Proverbs, because I think a lot of parents want to hang on to that. And, you know, I've thought for a long time, it's like, well, the numbers show that 2/3 of the kids leave when they graduate high school, only a third come back. And I was like, well, okay, so maybe that Proverbs passage is right. But we know that if prophecy is ever wrong at all, then it's not of God. So it's like, now, wait a minute. That means that if only half come back that leave, that would make that scripture wrong. So that can't be the case. That can't be what this is about, because we know people who come back, but we also know people that leave and never come back, and their parents were as faithful and diligent as they believe they should be to bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. So yeah, in my reading on that, the phrase the way he should go is actually a Hebrew idiom for in the way of his mouth. And so and people are absolutely divided, maybe not ugly divided, but there's some that believe it's the idea of help them go down the path that is really their gifting and their talents as far as their life is concerned, right? To Gene's point, if they want to be a violinist, don't make them try to be a baseball player. And you see so many parents that want to live their dreams through their kids, and it creates problems. And then to Steve's point, the other way is, you know, if you bring them up the way they want to be brought up, then they'll be a mess their whole life. So both of those seem to work, and they both are true, right? I mean, they're a lot more true than the way that we want to force it as parents, I think is the reality. So Preston, the only other thing I want to say is you're dead on about Deuteronomy 6. I mean, that's where I would have gone. You know, that we're supposed to teach our children diligently. But the part that has to come before that is you have to love the Lord with your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And unfortunately, for too many parents, when we used to have an academy at Faith, I used to listen to the kids some mornings talk about their home lives. And it's like, just because you put a kid in a Christian school, don't expect them to turn out right if your home is anything but Christ-like.
Ouch. Ouch. Ow. Brother Gene said the final chapter is not written. Hey, folks, that's truth too. Here's the unfortunate part about that, and this is a discussion that I have often with Diane when we start talking about our kids. Because the final chapter is not written, and the natural order of things is that parents predecease their kids, you may never get to observe or experience the final chapter. And that's a kind of yuckiness that really can put that can put a kind of dismay, a kind of sadness over your household. But the unfortunate part, the unfortunate reality is, and Sarah said this earlier, you can make your kids do things up to a certain point, and when they're ready, because they're adults, to not do, then they're not going to do. So let me pause there. Thoughts, because especially in this world that we're in, folks, indoctrination is probably the key of what we're experiencing, not just as Americans, but as world citizens. You are being force-fed to accept and apply a whole lot of concepts that I would hope make you feel uncomfortable. And another neat point, folks, about this, these Bible phrases is these actually were directed to folks who were becoming adults at 13. Right? So can you see the difference? Is we don't even consider our 13-year-olders, we consider them to still be perhaps just removing themselves from bedwetting, let alone being adults. So the our town, their town mentality comes into play here, where we're dealing with a young person who, and this will get me in trouble. So I guess if you need to write or send your cards and letters, go ahead. They were much more mature at an earlier age than our young people are now. In fact, I would suggest maybe some of our young people aren't really fully baked until maybe they're 26, 28.
Sometimes I think that's a gender dependent sort of baking too. Girls mature sooner than boys do. And we boys are sometimes fortunate if we're allowed to escape adolescence. And lots don't. You see a lot of that on television.
I didn't say nothing.
I understand that. I'd like to share a couple of well-known names with you. One of them is Susanna Wesley. Okay. And the other is Billy Sunday. I think about Susanna Wesley's drive and sense of calling in her life to raise up John and Charles Wesley, among others, to be mighty. And she gets very little credit, it seems, for her part in that. The home life, yes. And I'm not saying that wasn't true in your house. I'm just saying that there has to be a congruency there. Bruce is right. We had people that were hoping to try to overcome their home environment by sending the kids out to something hopefully that was better. But if there's an inconsistency, as soon as they can get out of that, because they see hypocrisy, they see inconsistency, they say, okay, I can follow this guy and Professor so-and-so, that gets their attention. Susanna Wesley fought against that by a home. And then the other is Billy Sunday. His dying words were sad as sad could be. While he didn't really mean it the way it sounds, he saved the world and lost his children. Because he was out doing, and not maintaining and preserving the home life that he perhaps should have. So, it's sobering thoughts for sure.
Well, what you're talking about is you're beginning to impinge on what is the common anomaly about what they call PKs and MKs, right? Missionaries' kids, pastors' kids, is that these folks are so busy missionarying, they're so busy pastoring, that their household goes unattended. And although the ideal is that Jesus, and they're seeing Jesus displayed everywhere else, the household itself may not be that which reflects the nurture and admonition of the Lord. And folks, if anybody knows the real deal, it's our kids. And so when Brother Gene is talking about, when Pastor Bruce is talking about listening to some of the conversations that the kids have, it's a reality, folks, that when we send our kids, and you guys have seen this before, when you have a bus ministry and you send your kids to church, or you send your kids to Christian school, you're expecting that the Jesus is going to rub off on your kids from the school or from the school bus or from the Sunday school. And that's not training up a child, because we spend more time with our children than the school system. And folks, and if you're not, then we should be, than the school teacher. If we're sending our kid to church one day a week, that's one day. We've got them 6. So we're looking at an ideal in Proverbs. Proverbs, in fact, has a lot of ideals. So, and I like that Pastor Bruce unpacked this for us, that if it's prophecy, a lot of that stuff in Proverbs just doesn't come true. So it can't be prophecy. It's got to be something else. And it's idealistic. It's poetry. It's direction-oriented literature for us. It's not prophetic. So when it lets us down, which is how I felt about it, we need to have an understanding about what those books are, how to point fingers at those books being the bad guy, if you understand what I mean, and understanding and correctly interpreting them, and then not believing that the scriptures let us down, because we have to understand how those books work. And if we take verses, or we take even books or concepts out of context, then we're going to think that we don't need, our hope shouldn't be built on this special revelation. And that's why we study it. That's why we study to understand the law, the prophets, the poetry, the prophecy, because it's important to understand how all of these work to supplement and then to also drive and inform our lives.
Hey, can I contradict myself?
Yeah.
Just a kind of a thought exercise. All right. So think about the Nazis for a minute, right? I mean, they were masters at indoctrinating people, especially the children. They did a really, really good job at that, sadly. But we talk about that, and this is just from a salvation standpoint, but I think it goes deeper if you think heart, soul, mind, and strength. That really people are moved by really one of 3 major ways, right? Intellect, emotion, or will. That's what's going to lead somebody to salvation. Probably simplifying it a little too much, but that's where we are. And one wonders if, because of the fact that proverb says that we're to train a child in the way he should go or goes, the way of his mouth, I wonder if maybe there's something there to the thought that perhaps, but whether it's family or church or whichever, that maybe we're not as skilled sometimes at recognizing which one of those 3 is ultimately going to capture the heart of the child. I don't have any kids, so I'm not being critical of anybody, but I know in my own life and kind of where I was, that I probably, even though I'm kind of probably think fairly intellectually, I probably respond more emotionally. That probably is, when my heart is broken, I'll make a move. But I wonder if there were people in my younger life who really got that. I think my parents did to a point, but I guess what I'm getting at is, if this is speaking to the instruction of a child, is it that we perhaps sometimes are not hitting them in the right one of those 3 far enough down the path? I just throw that out there, because let's face it, in our public schools today, they're figuring out how to cover all 3. It's the same kind of idea that some people are visual learners, some folks, are, the different kinds of ways that people learn. So I wonder if, without throwing the proverb under the bus, maybe we don't understand it fully enough, perhaps. Just throwing it out there.
Thoughts
I
about
think
that?
you're right. Yes, I think you're right, Bruce. And I think that plays very well into the very thing Preston mentioned, time. Matter of fact, a dear departed brother said, kids spell love Time, time. And when kids are in public school, they get indoctrinated too. And consequently, as they get indoctrinated, their parents seem like idiots because they come home and that they're trying to Jesus direct them, if you will, like you said, 1 day a week. They've also got these hours that in the school system, and they're coming home to a contradictory sort of environment that doesn't seem to make sense either way. So we have to help them make sense by getting in their business, asking them what they learned at school, and find out whether or not the school is countermanding what we want them to be understanding. And if it is, we certainly are not going to be able to steer the school system, but we need to make certain that they have a means of critically thinking through what they get in the school system and understand one of the things that Bruce and Christine said for years and years and years: the lost are going to act like the lost. We have to understand that that's their perspective because they got nothing else. One of the couple of things the video Michaela shared with me pointed out, and she even said this is really, really sad. There were some people that said, yeah, we're Christians, and we don't know how people get along without having Christ in their life and living a Christ-like life. But there was this one guy, and by the way, I observed that most of the folks that she spoke to were girls, women. The one guy who said he was a Christian probably should have stopped at that point. But as he began to expound upon it, he was muddling through who died on the cross and what the meaning was, and he really had no clue as to where his hope, if he had any, was grounded. So we have a willy-nilly understanding of what salvation is, what Christianity is, what we've got this mile wide, an inch deep Christianity that is not strong enough, not critically thinking enough to be able to impact and push back against the indoctrination that's coming from the other side.
Oh, a bunch of thoughts, but so this may come out as really disjointed. So I apologize. But first off, I think my boys are that old yet, but I'm thankful that they're no longer that little toddler stage anymore. Because I think what a lot of parents today do not realize, they're still caught up in other things, that there is a legitimate war on children.
Mm-hmm.
It's a war about children's minds. And if you want to drill that down even more, there's a definite war on young boys. Intentional. Because if you can break it down there, you can break down families later.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't grasp that early on, you're already at a disadvantage. Then on top of that, you have to remember that we're all born with a sin nature.
That's right.
So you've got that disadvantage because what you're trying to teach them is counter to their nature. We live in a society and in an economic situation where it's really, really difficult to where at least one parent can stay home. I'm not saying it's impossible, but I'm saying it's very difficult. So then what you end up with is children who are being raised by their daycare at a young age, and then they're being raised by a school. And even if you take your children to church, you're getting a limited amount of time with them because you're both working. On top of that, they're getting way more hours at their daycare. They're getting way more hours at their school system. You could take them to church, but an hour in Sunday school and maybe an hour in church, 2 hours a week, not going to cut it.
That's right.
On top of that, they have the influences of social media, TV, commercials, you name it. It's a lot to try to combat. You know, I think the reason that children work at a different time period when all those distractions were considered grown at 13 was because they were none of those distractions.
That's right.
And life was tough. You either matured quickly or you simply didn't survive. And we've sort of gotten so comfortable away from that that you're allowed to be a slacker until you're 28 if you want. I mean, really. You can do nothing. And you have a government that will support you. You have, you don't have to really take responsibility for yourself. We've taken that away. So what you end up with is a society of, and Bruce had mentioned the school system or the way it's structured. Honestly, the school system is structured to favor young girls. Young boys, you're hyper, you don't understand danger, so you're willing to take risks and do risky things. And constantly you're told, sit down, be quiet, don't do that, don't climb on this, don't do that. And all of those things are taken away to where a boy who normally should be, as they get older, less risk averse than females, more logical, also more willing to do things. You end up with soft men leading soft families, teaching soft values to soft kids.
Strong.
And that's what you get.
Yep.
And it's really hard to fight all of that.
Wow, if that's your disjointed, Steve, man. What a neat argument off of your top of mind awareness, because when Bruce made his point and said, I'm going to kind of contradict myself, where you are is where my response was there as well. And maybe following up on the brilliant interjection that you just shared. Folks, you got to recognize too, and this is something I can say among home folk, right? The adversary's in this game. The adversary's in this game to win as many, because see, he can't win the game, but he can win as many away from the cure of being enemies with Yahweh God as he can. And Steve hit on this, and so did Bruce. And so let me see if I can maybe put both of their thoughts together to have us home folk believing people recognize why history and why sociology and why our town is important for us, folks, as we look to impress upon the world the need for Jesus, right? There was a time prior to probably the industrial age, and I would say we're past the industrial age now. We're in a technological age now. This is even a different age than the industrial age. But folks, prior to the industrial age, most families were agrarian. And so to Steve's point, and a little bit to Pastor Bruce's point, the work life happened with the whole family. The family typically had a business that involved husband and wife and kids when they were able to, because the idea was that the kids weren't being brought up as slackers. They had to pull what their particular ratio or proportion of weight was with a family that had a family-oriented business. So dad didn't travel 30 to 60 miles away from his family. Dad was a presence in his family, even though it was maybe for a different aspect, which was the work portion before the food preparation portion, before perhaps the time to sit and worship, because they didn't have all of the distractions of the radio and the TV and streaming and cell phones and Hulu and Tubi and Freevee. So dad was there. And see, sometimes when we think about the failures of the family or the breakdown of the family, we don't take a look to see what the benefits of the agrarian family was like. We just see that life is better for us, the way that Steve alluded to. But the adversary's in this game to make the dad a fop, to make men soft and less manly, less menches. And because the family is God's first institution, if we're ineffective as the family, well then, folks, our government's going to have trouble. Our churches are going to have trouble. Our businesses are going to have trouble, right? And so one of the other components that blends into this is Before we became, especially us as Americans, became very, very sophisticated, we had multi-generations under one roof. In fact, that was an obligation, is that the older took care of the young until the young were well enough to take care of themselves, and then the young made way to take care of the folks who brought them there. So when Bruce is talking about the variety of learning styles or the variety of ability to touch and indoctrinate a young person, well, where I might miss it because right now I'm career and I'm work driven and I'm working on putting food on my table. Well, my mom or my dad, who may live in the house with us, or my wife's mom or my wife's dad, is going to strike some of the learning areas or some of the heart, mind, soul, strength areas that I might not get to, because we have multi-generations that in many ways are looking at our family from different lenses. But those lenses contribute as a whole. And so, folks, part of what I guess I'm saying right now is I know that we're all very possessive and we're all very protective. But in this kind of home folk believer community, we have to give ourselves permission to do the thing that Hillary Clinton, the one thing that Hillary Clinton got right. And that was the mindset of it takes a village. And folks, you know, hopefully without dating myself, you understand the concept when our neighbors whom we knew and had relationships could help to raise your kids. So folks, if we're all supposed to be believers and we all love Jesus, then we have to kind of give each other permission in some ways to intrude in our lives and say to us, maybe, are you getting this? Are you nailing this? Are you addressing this? And not be offended or insulted by that, because some of that might be stuff I'm missing. So I just crossed an ugly threshold there. So thoughts? Man.
I can't say anything. I live in a multi-generational house. So I think we have some of that going on. And to Steve's point, I'm privileged to have my wife able to stay home and instruct our daughter. So she's not getting the indoctrination from public schools. But she is getting exposure to that through some of her other activities where she's hanging out with kids that are in public schools. So I think her strength is happening there. I think you're right on. We have, the other day we were somehow watching the Waltons replay and looking at their life. I mean, John had a sawmill. House was working, and the mom was staying home and doing what she needed to do. And during this period of time in our country, there weren't a lot of money to have. We're talking about an economy that was really, 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 really depressed. And they were content with what they had in a manner that we just cannot seem to grasp now. Because it's, you know, the flashier, the better, the shinier, that's what motivates us. And I think it shouldn't. And I think we need to get back to some of those basics, some of that simplicity, some of that that just gratitude. An attitude of gratitude goes a long, long way. It's been said, grateful children are very rarely, if ever, rebellious children. And I think I think we can work towards that a little bit better. But yeah, I think every bit what you said is not crossing the line. It is right on.
I'm still staggered by what Steve said about the soft men. That is so true. Yeah, though it's been said though that the church is geared to women too, and that's kind of there was a book that came out years ago called "Why Men Hate Church," and it talks a lot about some of these things that, but for different reasons. But the thing that I kind of take away from all of this is that indoctrination, and again I'll go back to the Nazis. Everybody was a cog in the machine. Uniqueness thinking outside the box. Those are bad things. You don't want that. And so when we go to the government schools, and I'm a product of that, I think there's been a lot of shifts since 1979 when I graduated. But you don't want to do exception processing with somebody that's in the system. They're a problem. And when I was at that parade last night, there was a family there, and two families actually, and had about 3 boys who were around 6th grade age. And by the end of the parade, I just wanted to beat them. Because they just, they can't be still, they can't behave. It's like, just get with the program, kid, for like 15 minutes. And so, yeah, I get that. Boys gum up the works. And so that's why they're going to try to do that. But here's the converse to that. I love the fact that Corinthians 12 tells us that as we disciple people, the thing we're supposed to do is highlight their individuality and to stir that on to its full realization in their life and in the life of the body. And so we're not all a foot, we're not all a hand, we're all individuals that are part of that greater whole. So it's such a stark picture and difference from what the world is trying to do to our young men and women.
There is a lockstep sort of thing that they're trying to get us to fall into, and yeah, I have a tendency to be kind of rebelling against that too. I don't want to necessarily do what everybody else does, and soft men. I think it's gone even further than that when it comes to the entertainment world, and you might be able to track it back a little farther. But I'm thinking that if you might be able to take it back to a guy named Ralph Cramden. And that's gotten very little response there. Ralph, okay.
I don't.
Ralph Cramden was the dad, no dad. I mean, he was, thankfully, none of them had any kids. He was the bus driver in The Honeymooners. Okay. And he was an idiot, played by Jackie Gleason. And was even more of an idiot because he worked in the sewer, and I think he just had too many of those gases he inhaled. Anyway, he was dumb. And so the entertainment world, fast forward a couple of decades, you get to Everybody Loves Raymond. You get to over and over at King of Queens, you get to the place where the guy is the moron in the house. What's that? Tim Allen. Give him something powerful and he will blow something up. So it's been our entertainment world, and we enjoy that. Okay? We enjoy that entertainment. But as far as gearing things toward women, you mentioned a book, Bruce. Another book came to mind as you said that. John R. Rice wrote a book entitled, excuse the expression, ladies, Bob-Haired Bossy Women. He was really trying to go against the whole man deficiency in the church world. And we need to get guys to step up and do the right thing, be a thinker, be the man of the house. And I have a tough time saying even that much because I live in a house full of women and I don't own the house, and it's tough for me to even do much of that. But I'm right with you. I understand what you're saying.
So by the way, I don't want to, that idea, what I said was based upon some things I've seen this week, so I can't take full credit for this. It's stuff from Fuel Project where he's talking about hard values and soft values. It's from, which we were talking about how the differences in children today and in the past. I saw a picture this week from like, what was it? It was really early, like 1900s, late 1800s, early 1900s. And there's a kid who had just finished working, and he's sitting on a chair, a little tiny chair. He's got his legs crossed. He's got a little hat on, and he's got a stogie in his mouth. And like, this is Jack so and so he was 3. And I'm thinking, wow. So I had that image, and there's a saying, I think it's actually maybe, but there's a saying where it says, soft times create hard men, and then hard men create soft times, and then soft times create hard men, something along those lines. With the idea being difficult situations create people who are stronger and tougher and able to handle those, and then they work hard to alleviate those situations, and then they make the time, by going through all that, they make the times easy again. But those easy times creates people who are soft because they're not used to any type of stressors on them, anything that pushes them to be better or work harder, any of that stuff. And so then you get soft times again, and then those soft times make things more difficult for people, add stress to those people, and creates hard men who then work to correct it. It's just simple. It's sort of the idea that history repeats itself, although I don't really like that term because I don't think that's true. So I think situations repeat themselves, and then human nature, people react the same. Yeah. So I just think that's so it's just a mesh of those different concepts.
It reminds me of something else I read this past week. Our founder of the company I work for, A.W. Lee, he started college, if I've got my information correctly, he started college at the age of 13. And this is in the mid to latter 1800s. So we have, and you see that a lot in a lot of different great leaders that have come out. They were in school. I mean, how old was Jefferson when he sat on the hill in Monticello and wrote T.H. Jefferson Esquire? Because he had, finished his law degree as a teenager, something like that. I think again, we let kids have less responsibility. Kind of tough in our world today because of the laws, child labor laws especially, to put this responsibility on them. Yesterday, was it yes? No, day before yesterday, Michaela had her first work-related luncheon. Whatever you want. I know. At her first meal-related work meeting. She's 15. I'm excited about that prospect. It's kind of a denial thing too, but yes, I think our kids grew up quicker, sooner, took responsibility more readily 150, 200 years ago. And we need to probably see what components were involved there that we can recreate. I don't recommend going back to the agrarian society because I'm a techno geek and I would not survive. But we need to probably see what components there were at play there that we might be able to have kids be more responsible as they move forward.
Now, are you sure? Are you sure when you say that, Brother Gene? Are you sure about what you just said?
I didn't die if I were in the agrarian society.
Okay. So then, when we go back, so if we
say real quick,
go ahead.
I blew that quote. I just realized I blew it. The quote is soft times create soft men create hard times create hard men create soft times. So that's the cycle.
That's right. Okay. That's right. Okay. So Brother Gene harkens back the productivity of our society, especially as we respond to our kids, that we were more effective 150, 200 years ago. But he also says, I don't want to go back to the times that were agrarian because I'm a techno geek. Okay? So what's the remedy then when Brother Gene says we were more effective back then, but we can't go back to those times? So let me make a suggestion or so as we as we kind of move toward our finish line for today. Now, I'm going to say something right now that might get me kicked out of church, and I guess I'll have to join Sarah and Jean if that's the case. But do you realize that prior to, and I don't know the exact date, but I can comfortably tell you that in the 19th century, in the 1800s, for the most part in the Western world, there was no children's church. Thank you for that, Pastor. And I'm also going to suggest that many of you in the room, and I don't know that that Nathan and Daniel have experienced this, but some of you older folks have. If you are Baptist and maybe even evangelical and maybe even Protestant, you all experienced the fear and fright and uniqueness of Kids' Day in church. Okay, some of you aren't following me there, and that's okay. Here's what that was. One day a year, your kids got to run the service. So the kids took the offering. Some kid brought the message. Some kid prayed. Some kid, you had the kids group lead the music. You guys with me now? You all tracking with me now? Okay. And probably my years in Pastor Bruce's orbit has helped to shape me that is a bad thing. That is a terrible, terrible, awful thing. That statement, by the way, is the one that's getting me kicked out. And here's why. Let me tell you one of the joyful experiences that I don't share this with him always. I probably share this more with his mom than him, but I'm going to let him hear it today. I am very, very proud of Nate. Very, very proud of Brother Nate. Now, I enjoy when Brother Daniel hangs out with us, and here's why. Brother Daniel, he really doesn't have to hang out with us. So he's kind of a traveling man, and he's got dual citizenship kind of in Lynchburg and in Richmond and wherever else he decides to make his imprint. So when he decides to hang out with us, I always find that that's pretty special. And I appreciate that because he could choose to be any place. Brother Nathan, not only because he's kind of the younger of the two bros, but he's a little more localized in that he's either home or he's kind of up at school, but he contributes to our service in a way that is very thoughtful and thought-provoking for us on a weekly basis. And here's one of the things that through the years that I gleaned from Pastor Bruce, and it's something I covet right now. And this is part of the problem, folks, with indoctrination, and especially where our churches are doing a disservice. Because 150, 200 years ago, if not in the time of Jesus, when folks were getting together to worship, there were portions of the worship that were handled by 13, 14, 15, 16, 17-year-olds. That does not happen in our churches now. One day a year, they get special kids time to do a kids service. And when they do that, there's a whole bunch of caveats where we go, well, it's not going to really be as good as normal because it's a bunch of kids doing it. And mostly the kids are doing it out of duress. Here's what I've gleaned from Pastor Bruce, and I love this, and I think that this is important. And folks, this lends itself to our Jesus encounters. If our kids have professions of faith and we're raising them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord, and we're training them up in the way that they should go so that when they're old, we want them to grow according to their shape, to their bent, right? That they won't depart, then we need to give them opportunities to practice their faith as soon as their faith says it's working. As soon as they profess their faith, they need to have the same sort of opportunities that we do. Whether that's taking the offering if you're in a church building, whether that's providing music, if you've got the talent to do that, whether that's praying, whether that's bringing a word or so in a way that you're learning how it is to say and shape that which the Lord impresses upon you. But we don't do that. We wait until our kids usually come back from college because then we think that they're adults. We don't give our kids a chance to at all shine and demonstrate that they are possessors of that which we have kind of lent them to profess. And it's easier for our kids to leave us and then just find something altogether different, in part because we really never considered them adults, not in our own home. And they're certainly not competent enough to do anything in a church service. Come on. And folks, so that's why I have expectations. For instance, if I'm assigning, let's say we've got people that are part of a Bible study and we've got kids that are going to do it, the kids need to do what they say they're going to do. If we've got kids that say that they profess Jesus, then it's not just the adults that should be talking about Jesus encounters. Our younger people should be talking about Jesus encounters too. Because when I read this Bible, I'm aware that we're talking to potentially 13, 14, 15-year-olds at this time. But I'm also aware, kind of like Steve says, and like I've suggested, we've got slackers maybe up until they're 28 years of age. And we're perfectly fine with that. And we're raising those and we're encouraging that. And that's why our kids are punks and wimps, because we are not doing the job to counter the indoctrination that folks are getting because we're not spending the time that Brother Gene talked about. So I'm done. I'm quiet there. Your feedback, your comments as we kind of march off into the finish line.
I like that suggestion because then it helps train these young folks for service, and then it also gives them a piece of the pie in a sense. It gives them a sense of responsibility. It gives them like, I'm part of this team. I'm part of this effort. I've got something invested in this. At the same point, I wanted to say this, but I will because it's kind of funny, but it's also kind of sad. I saw something this week that made me think of the softness of this generation that we've raised up. I don't know if this young lady was acting or not for views. I'm not sure that she was because she seemed generally terrified. But I saw a video of this young lady this week, and she was in her home and she was crying. Keep in mind, she was in her home, so she's in her mid to probably late 20s, and she's crying. And the reason she's crying is because she's had some unwelcome visitors in her home, and she's upset because she has crickets that are in her home. And she's begun crying because she's been told that it's bad luck to remove crickets from her home. And she did that. She removed one cricket, and she's had the worst luck ever that week. And so now she has a cricket near her toaster, and she's unable to make some toast this morning. So she's broken down in tears because she cannot get these crickets out of her house. And I'm thinking to myself, that's incredibly sad. It's funny on one level, but it's also incredibly sad that you would put your belief in a system of, if you get rid of crickets, you're going to have bad luck on yourself. And to me, that's one. There are tons of examples out there of the softness of this generation. But to me, that just struck me this week of this young lady who was unable to no longer function in her own home because of crickets.
But there is something to be said about getting young people involved in the services in some way, shape, or form. Not necessarily running with it on Kids Day, right? But I always appreciated Bruce because he was not a proponent of kicking the kids out of service, right? He said they should learn to be able to sit in here, right? And listen and pay attention. Now, babies, a little different story. Fine, we have a nursery, right? But once you are hitting kindergarten, first grade, you got to figure out how to sit still, pay attention, listen, and process. So I always appreciated that with Preston, especially with the kids, because you're helping them to feel included, involved, and the idea being, at least maybe Bruce, this was your thought process and your idea, is that then the family can have a discussion about what they all heard at church that day. And ideally, parents could be answering the questions that they might have, like, wait, what did he mean by this? So getting the kids involved in some way, shape, or form is a good thing, and gives them some ownership. Pastor in Florida did that. They had kids go to children's church until they were like 4. And then once they reached the age of 5, they were in the main service. Nothing wrong with that.
Okay, just waiting for my time.
Sorry.
Yeah, you kept interrupting me. I tried talking, Dad yelled in front of me. I can't believe it. Anyways, because we're talking about the Bible here, right? So 1 Timothy 4:12, let no one despise you for your youth, but set the believers an example in speech, in conduct, in love, in faith, in purity. In some translations, instead of despise, it's looked down on. So we should add like youth. It's been a while since that has applied to some people in this room and attending online, but
All that way more.
well, I don't think you guys really apply to youth anymore, but there are still components in it, I guess, and training them up. But as youth, we should be setting examples for others. We should be not just there. We should be leading in setting examples in the way we talk, the way we conduct ourselves, the way we love one another, and our purity, and all of those things. Everything that we should be doing as youth, we should be leading other people. We shouldn't just be on the backlog the entire time sitting in the back. We're not called to be back or Baptist. We're called to actually set an example for other people and not let other people despise us or look down on us just because we're younger than them. Because your maturity as a Christian does not equate to your actual age. A lot of people that are like really old farts have no maturity as Christians. They don't believe what they say. They don't do anything. And as such, we should be like actually like taking charge and like leading in certain aspects of our faith. Anyways.
Breach.
Let's go, young people. Represent.
Aren't you glad he's home, Preston?
Well, how else are you supposed to talk about the Bible without like
Please direct your cards and letters for this particular component to Nathan. Kathy made a comment that said that moving children's church from 4 to 5 is not a bad thing. Now, remember, I also said prior to about 1900, there was no such thing as children's church, right? Here's the good thing, because it's not that it's a bad thing. Here's the good part of it. Your children are going to learn worship by watching you. So when you isolate them, they're not necessarily emulating those folks that they spend the most valuable time with. And that means if young children are watching their moms worship and their dads in tears, that's going to inspire and encourage them to learn how to worship in truth and spirit, in some ways, according to what Nate just described, right? And let me make a silly point, because I've heard Brother Gene talk about this for years, and not necessarily in a bad way, but he's kind of wondered about this, and this imprint lends itself to this comment. Brother Gene sort of says, Preston, you think that music is this elevated sort of thing. Sometimes it's more important than worship. So part of it has to do with this discussion, okay? My dad was a professional gospel singer, and my brother and I both liked what my dad did. And so from a very early age, we would emulate what my dad and his group would do, or other groups that they would perform with would do. And so my dad watched this happening. And so he asked me, made me, see Joe Jackson, come into his group's rehearsals and learn a song. And when the song was good enough, my dad called me out in church, actually in an auditorium where they were doing a concert, called me up on stage at 10 and had me lead a song with them. So I say that to say that experience as a 10-year-old impacted my life to say that I didn't need to wait to be able to impact positively. And from an early age, that was in some ways the bent and the shape that I was directed in. And that's a very valid and valuable part of my life now. That's why it stands out the way that it does. But that was because my dad inculcated something that he saw and said, let's nurture this. And when you're ready, you don't have to be 18 or 22 or get a music degree. When you're ready, you're going to be ready. So Your thoughts, your feedback. Thanks, Nate. Again, very powerful. Literally, someone said the F word today in our worship time, and please direct those comments, those letters to Nathan.
I did not, in fact, say the F word. That was Daniel. Wasn't me.
Wow.
Am I my brother's keeper? My brother's keeper.
I did, in fact, not murder him.
Other thoughts, other responses?
On occur to me. We are so enamored with these child prodigies. Yeah, here's a 5-year-old that can play Beethoven on the piano, and yeah. Why is that not the norm? Yet we're so protective of our kids, and so yeah, be a kid as long as you can type of thing. Yeah, but we're so enamored with all these child prodigies, and it's like that should be the norm.
Because then the child prodigies are less unique if everybody is endorsing or encouraging their kids to work their talent out and then be public about it. So the other remedy, folks, is our society doesn't say our kids are adults at 13. But if they profess a faith in Jesus, then the same requirements and responsibilities are those which we should demand from them. Because that's what's going to make their faith more obvious and honest as they get older. And folks, that's the answer for child indoctrination. I would almost tell you in some ways, components of that are elements to help with adult indoctrination.
The other thought that occurred to me is when Nate very pointedly said that this may not apply to us regarding youth. I keep going back to a comment I read and heard recently. It's really weird being the same age as old people. And that's almost like
It's okay. Daniel may be young, but he feels like old.
It is weird.
Well, folks, we're closing down. Thank you for hanging with us today. Obviously, not feeling too ill today because we certainly went over it. Thank you, Gene. Thank you, Brother Steve. Thank you, Bruce, for hanging out with us. Please consider that the earlier we have our kids working out their salvation, the easier it's going to be for them to really embrace and own it when they come into their own. And that means praying, singing, discussing, sharing, witnessing, evangelizing. All of those things should be on our kids' dashboards. And we should not be offended by by us asking our kids to operate if they say Jesus is their Lord.